Christmas might have just come early for a few college basketball hoopers who potentially have added eligibility thanks to a federal judge's recent ruling.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Christmas Eve, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host for today's show, Andy Patton, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Yes, here in the holidays, we got shows for you on Christmas Eve. We're going to have a show for you on Christmas Day, getting you ready for some games coming up this weekend. It's obviously a slow week. We got the Diamond Head Classic taking place over the next couple of days in Hawaii. Other than that, though, pretty quiet as coaches and players and such get to celebrate with their families. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, it is going to be a holiday-themed episode today, but first we are going to break down what Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia's lawsuit means for junior college players at the college basketball level. We'll talk about that in the first segment, and then we're going to just have a little bit of a holiday game, naughty or nice. We're going to talk about some conferences, some players, some coaches, some classes, how they're doing, some naughty or nice for those respective groups. But let's start the conversation today talking about a recent announcement or news story about a quarterback. I know it's Locked On College Basketball, but this does have reaching implications potentially for the college basketball space. On December 18th, a federal judge granted a preliminary injunction which at the current moment means that Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia, who is suing the NCAA, is effectively potentially going to get an extra year of eligibility. I'm trying to be careful with the language here because a preliminary injunction basically means that there's a pause on the ruling right now. It doesn't mean that we're for sure going to have a situation where this rule changes. But with regards to the rule, Diego Pavia began his college football career, playing in the junior college level. And he effectively was suing on the basis that he does not believe his junior college years should count against his total eligibility as a college student athlete. He's claiming it's a violation of antitrust law because of the limiting ability to profit off of NIL. So effectively, and I'm boiling this down very, very simple. Obviously, there are great articles out there, great podcasts, great resources to learn much more about this, whether you're interested in it from a football perspective, a basketball perspective, just a lawsuit perspective, whatever it may be. But basically, Pavia's argument is, I couldn't profit off of name, image, likeness while at the junior college level, so that shouldn't count against the amount of years that I get to play at the Division I level where I can profit off of NIL. There's some level of an argument there. Whether it actually goes through, that's kind of the question. What we've seen in the past is when these preliminary injunctions are put out with previous NCAA lawsuits or lawsuits involving the NCAA basically throws their hands up and says, well, if we're not going to break the law, so if the judges or if the government basically determines that you are allowed to do this or we're not allowed to enforce this, then we're just going to let it happen. That's why there's this excitement right now around the idea that players who are currently at a certain grade level may end up being granted extra eligibility because the years that they spend at the junior college level will no longer count against their eligibility. Again, I want to be very clear. This is not a set in stone thing. This is not confirmed. And it is not something that I would imagine any players are just banking on or assuming at this point is going to happen. But it could. It might. And it is going to be very fascinating to see how hard the NCAA fights this, how the response to this from players, coaches, etc., fans ends up being, because one of the complaints that folks have had about college sports lately, mostly basketball and football, is the age of players. And with the COVID eligibility kind of finally starting to dwindle around college basketball, we're going to get a return to the majority of players being between 18 and 22. And now with this potential ruling, if this were to become official in junior college players, you could play 2 years of junior college and then go play 4 years of college basketball or college football or any sport at the D1 level, that's going to create a more age disparity where you'll have 18-year-olds now competing against 24, maybe even 25-year-olds. And so a lot of folks aren't going to like that. And I think that's completely justified and understandable, specifically in football, where the difference between an 18-year-old and a 24-year-old just physically, I mean, it's there in basketball, but in football, it becomes borderline dangerous at times. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with that. But what I want to talk about here is who this could potentially impact. And there are hundreds of players at the Division I level who have at least 1 year or maybe 2 years of junior college experience. So we're not obviously going to list all of them. In fact, we're going to list 5 of them. 5 players who are currently playing at high major programs, or in the case of Gonzaga, are a high major program, who are in a position where they could potentially gain extra eligibility beyond this season due to this ruling. Again, all potential, all theoretical at this point, but could be some interesting ramifications in the world of college basketball. Here are the 5 players. First up, Nick Pringle, who is currently at South Carolina. Pringle began his career at Wofford in the 2020-21 season, and then in 21-22, he was at a junior college, and then he came back to the D1 level, spent 2 years at Alabama in 22-23 and 23-24, and is now playing at South Carolina. So he's already played. This is his 4th season of Division I college basketball. So not even counting the JuCo, he's already played 4 years, but that 2020-21 season, of course, is the COVID year, so that does not count as a year of eligibility. If the junior college season were to not count as a year of eligibility, that would mean he'd have 2 years at Alabama, 1 year at South Carolina this year, and then he would have an extra year on top of that if he wanted to use it. Again, that's obviously part of this is we're just looking at players who could use extra eligibility. They may not all choose to do that if given that opportunity. Pringle is playing very well for Lamont Paris and the Gamecocks, averaging just over 10 points, about 7 rebounds, 1.5 assists per game, shooting 65.5% from the field. He was a quality player at Alabama, stayed in the SEC, now playing well for this team, this Gamecocks team. I'm sure Lamont Paris and South Carolina would love to have him back for another year if he chose to do so. Next up, I mentioned Gonzaga. Michael Ajayi is one of the more interesting players that this potentially impacts as well. He spent the first 2 years of his post-high school career at the junior college level. Then last year, he came to D1 at Pepperdine, got discovered by Lorenzo Romar while playing in pickup basketball in the state of Washington. Romar found him, recruited him to come to Pepperdine. Last year for the Waves, he led the WCC in scoring, was one of the top rebounders, transferred this offseason to Gonzaga, and he spent most of the offseason deliberating whether he was going to actually come to Gonzaga or stay in the NBA draft process. He was being mocked as a potential late second-round pick, opted to come back to school to go play at Gonzaga, a system that is more NBA style, that's going to showcase him more as a role player as opposed to being the guy like he was at Pepperdine. Now, things haven't actually gone great for Michael Ajayi. He's kind of struggled to find his role. His playing time has diminished a little bit in favor of Ben Gregg for the Zags. He's averaging 7 points, a little over 5 boards, less than an assist per game, shooting just 16% from 3 after shooting 47% last year. This is a player who could reasonably choose to come back to Gonzaga, have a bigger role next year. Ben Gregg's graduating. We expect Graham Ike's probably not coming back. The entire backcourt, Caleb Battle, Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, they're all out the door. So Ajayi could take on a bigger role in a following season if he were to choose to come back. Again, he's only played 1 full year of D1 basketball, is in his second D1 season. So could, in theory, have 2 more years if he wanted to use them. A couple more guys to talk about here. Dior Johnson at Central Florida. Dior Johnson's played at 5 different high schools, committed to Syracuse, decommitted, committed to Oregon, decommitted, committed to Pitt, got kicked out of the Pitt program, and now is at Central Florida. It's been a absolutely wild ride for Dior Johnson. He played last year at the junior college level in 23-24. So this year at Central Florida is now his first season of college basketball. Again, he's already got 2 more years after this, 2 more years after this, could have a 3rd year if he wanted it. I don't know if Dior Johnson's going to want to play Division I college basketball for that long. He's certainly somebody who was hoping to be in the NBA as soon as he possibly could. Not playing all that much right now for Central Florida, averaging just 3 points, 1.5 assists, 1.2 boards on the year. We'll see if, as the year goes on, if his playing time increases, he gets more comfortable in that system. But not a player who I think this is actually going to impact all that much, just because I don't see him being somebody in college basketball that long. But it could have an impact if he does decide to spend more time at the D1 level. Brennan Rigsby at Minnesota is another one here. He started his career at a junior college in 21-22, spent 2 seasons at Oregon, and is now with Minnesota, also in the Big Ten. So he would have one more year if that junior college year doesn't count. Currently, this is expected to be his final year of college basketball. Having a solid year for the Golden Gophers, 6 points, 2.5 boards, just under 1 assist per game. He's not shooting it well from three, about 22.5%, but he was a much better three-point shooter at Oregon. So wouldn't be surprised to see that come up as the year goes on. Last but not least, Malik Ewin at Florida State. The Seminoles began his career at Ole Miss in the SEC in the 22-23 season, transferred away from Ole Miss, played at the junior college level in 23-24, came back to D1 hoops to play at Florida State this season. So he still has eligibility regardless, but might have an extra year of eligibility if that junior college year does not count. Very, very good player right now for the Noles. 13 points, 7.3 boards, about 2 assists per game, shooting 57% from the field. The kind of guy who could continue to develop and continue to get better with an extra year, where this could really have an impact on him and maybe even the potential for him to become an NBA player, or at least a very, very good college basketball player. Well, folks, this year's freshman class is clearly on the nice list, but the fifth-year seniors, not so much. We're going to talk about that in our naughty and nice segments to close out this holiday-themed episode of Locked On College Basketball, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NFL playoffs are almost here, and it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Right now, the Wooden Award odds are out. Janai Broom is the favorite. We're going to talk about fifth-year seniors in a second. He is the counterexample to how many of them have played this year. He is the odds-on favorite at -210. Cooper Flagg is next at +300. And then there's a big old gap before you get to Cam Jones of Marquette, who is third at +850. If you like those odds, if you like any of the odds for the Diamond Head Classic or any of the big-time games coming up this Saturday, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, folks, you better watch out. Santa Claus is coming to town, and we are talking about the naughty or nice list here on Locked On College Basketball to close out the show. We got two things on the naughty list, 2 things on the nice list for this segment, and then we're going to close it out with 4 more naughty or nice things to get through the show. And then, of course, we'll have some more fun Christmas-themed stuff on tomorrow's show as well. I will start with conferences. Pretty clear. We've talked about this quite a bit on the show already. The SEC, they're on the nice list. It seems like they did some things to piss off some folks on the football side of things this year, not getting as many teams in the tournament as they wanted, or in the college football playoff as they wanted to, and obviously not having some of the teams that are playing succeed in the way that they wanted. But whatever not goodwill they had going towards football, clearly that has gone towards men's basketball, because this conference has been flat out dominant this season. I mean, we continue to say it on the show, and I'm sure if anybody's getting tired of hearing it, just know that this is truly unprecedented, how unbelievably dominant, top to bottom, the SEC has been on the men's basketball side of things. There's a lot of reasons for it. I think the amount of money flowing through SEC schools right now is obviously resulting in these basketball programs being able to pay top dollar for players in the transfer portal, being able to offer significant amounts of NIL money. Even if a big percentage of their money is going towards the football program, there's still a lot left over that is obviously resulting in a ton of success. It's not just that. Of course, they're also paying for high-profile coaches, which has really helped elevate the level of many of the programs in this league. Right now, 3 teams are undefeated: Tennessee, Florida, Oklahoma. 5 teams have 1 loss. 7 teams have 2 losses. Only 1 team in the conference has 3 or more losses. That's South Carolina. Every single team in the conference is higher, 64th or higher at KenPom. Literally every single team in the top 65 at KenPom right now. 4 teams in the top 10. That's Auburn, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, and Alabama. 8 teams in the top 30. It's those 4 along with Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Ole Miss. This conference is fully on track to get 10 or more teams into the NCAA tournament this year. The record is 11. I would not be shocked at all if that record is at least tied, if not fully broken, by the SEC this year. If the SEC is on the nice list, that means the Big East is on the naughty list. Could have gone with the ACC here as well. Both conferences not delivering as expected this season. For the Big East, Marquette is 11-2. They are 10th at KenPom. Both St. John's and UConn are 12th and 15th respectively at KenPom. So the Big East has 3 of their 11 teams in the top 15 at KenPom. Nobody else is even in the top 50. No, not even in the top 50. Creighton is next at 53rd after losing to Georgetown. This Creighton season has not gone according to plan whatsoever for Coach Greg McDermott. Yes, they lost Pop Isaacs to the season. Obviously, that is a devastating loss for this team. They did just recently find out that Fedor Zugic, the Croatian freshman, Montenegrin freshman, is going to be eligible to play for the rest of the year. Hopefully they can get him up to speed and kind of help alleviate some of the depth issues they're having in the backcourt, but woof. Has not been a good year for the Blue Jays. Villanova's at 54. Xavier's down at 57. Georgetown's at 66. Seton Hall and Providence are wildly underperforming as well. It has been a rough go of things for the Big East this year. We'll see if Marquette, UConn, and St. John's can kind of keep this league up where it should be, but I'd be fairly surprised at this point if maybe it ends up being a 4-bid league, but it's certainly not looking like it's going to be more than 4, and a lot of that's going to depend on Creighton and what they're able to do. But Nova, Xavier, Georgetown, those teams, they got a pretty tough path right now without a lot of marquee games still left on their schedule. Looking ahead to classes, this freshman class is nice, folks. This is a nice freshman class. Been a couple of years without super dominant freshman groups. I think the COVID years threw that off a lot. The high school development was kind of in a rough spot because of COVID-19, and now we're starting to see that sort of come out of that a little bit. I think it's still going to be a factor for a bit, but this class in particular has been outstanding to watch this year. And we knew some of the names. We knew Cooper Flagg was going to be fantastic to watch. We knew Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper were going to make Rutgers, even though they haven't been super fun to watch outside of those two guys. We kind of knew they were going to be appointment TV, particularly for those who love to follow the NBA draft. We expected really big things and exciting things out of VJ Edgecombe. He's been a little bit up and down in that space, but we can see we can kind of see it coming together for him. But the depth in this freshman class is what really stands out to me. You have guys like Igor Demine at BYU, who has been really fun to watch this year as a distributor at his size. You have Asa Newell at Georgia, who's a top 15 player who didn't put up big numbers in high school because he was on a really loaded Montverde team, but he's been outstanding for Georgia as a stretch 4. You have the 2 freshmen at Illinois, Kasparis Jakusionis and Will Riley. You have Trey Johnson, who's an absolute bucket for Rodney Terry and the Longhorns. You got the other Dukies. You got Isaiah Evans. You got Con Knipple. You got Kaman Maluak, all doing good stuff for the Blue Devils. Of course, you got Ian Jackson and Drake Powell for North Carolina. The Tar Heels haven't been super exciting this year. They did just hold on for a nice win over UCLA, but we're starting to see those freshmen come together as well. You got Liam McNeely putting up some big net games for UConn. You got Boogie Fland leading the charge for Arkansas. There's a lot of really exciting, fun freshmen to watch this year, and it's the first time in a while we've had this much depth. There are some freshmen who are underperforming. I think Edgecombe is probably not performing at the level many folks were hoping to see from him. Jaleel Bethia is a guy who still has a lot of upside, and I think it's a product of being on a Miami team that's just a mess right now. But for the most part, the freshman class has been as advertised and in many ways better than advertised and has been truly fun to watch this season. And then also on the naughty list, the 5th-year seniors. Obviously, there are counterexamples to this. Janai Broom has been fantastic. There's a reason he's your front runner for National Player of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is the player who takes home that award. You also have Brian Kalkbrenner, despite Creighton not performing at the level they want to. He's been very good this year. There are other 5th-year seniors who are playing well. I don't want to throw an entire group under the bus here, but the most notable 5th-year guys haven't quite performed at the level we're used to seeing from them. Mark Sears, RJ Davis, and Caleb Love are 3 who really stand out. And if you look at their stats, none of them are playing bad. None of them are playing like just completely, under 10 points per game, complete non-factor for their team. All of them, I believe all of them are over 15 per game or around there at least. All of them are still, their team's leading scorer. I believe all of them are their team's leading scorer, at least right in that conversation. But the percentages are down. The big games are down. Like these guys just haven't quite played like we're used to seeing them. And when you've already played 4 years of college basketball and you've played at a super high level, the way that these guys have, it's kind of tough to keep that excitement going. It's kind of tough to continue to play at that level. But for these guys, you'd like to see them look a little bit more like themselves, and maybe they'll shake the rust off and get there. But for right now, hasn't quite been at that level. I didn't include Hunter Dickinson because he's not quite part of that guard trio, but he's been a little bit below average as well. Not terrible, not dramatically worse, just not quite where you thought that he would be. Two other guys I'd mention here are Coleman Hawkins and Umar Ballo. Neither are playing poorly, but neither seem like they're really good fits. I don't know, and we'll talk more about Jerome Tang in a second. Spoiler alert there. But Hawkins just doesn't really fit. His assist numbers are good. The scoring's not there. I just don't think that they got enough scoring in the portal for Kansas State. And I think Hawkins is not being able to do what he's capable of doing because he's just not in a system that fits him as well. Ballo is an odd fit at Indiana. He's playing decently well when asked to, like, doing what I think he's asked to do, but I just don't think it's a great fit. They should have left Malik Reneau at the 5, played Mackenzie Mbako as a small ball 4, and not gone after a big lumbering center who doesn't space the floor. But again, that's not Ballo's fault. That is more Coach Woodson's fault at Indiana. Cliff Omoruyi not playing quite as well as expected for Alabama as well. A few other names I'll just toss out there. Dylan Adewusu at Seton Hall, DJ Davis at Washington, Mitchell Saxon at St. Mary's, all guys who are just below where they typically contribute. But again, you're seeing some fifth-year seniors buck that trend, Broom among them, Kalk among them, many others as well. Well, I already teased it. We got a Big 12 coach on the naughty list. We also got a young and up-and-coming freshman from the SEC who is on the nice list. We're going to tell you why coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, going to college basketball games during the holidays is one of my favorite traditions. I got to see Gonzaga and Kentucky in Seattle this year. I also saw Gonzaga versus USC in Las Vegas last year. Had a blast at both those games, hanging out with my dad. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. I can attest to that completely. I've already used Game Time to buy Christmas gifts for family members this year, and you should too. If you're interested in buying a really quick turnaround on a Christmas present, you can see Gonzaga versus UCLA at the Intuit Dome. It is on December 28th. The game has been moved to 1 p.m. It was at 5. Now it's at 1 if that works for you in your schedule. They got 2 tickets for just $76 a piece at this incredibly cool new look venue. You can also get 2 tickets on the baseline for just $115 a pop. And folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. If you download the app now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time. All right, folks, closing out the show today, continuing to look through Santa's naughty or nice list here as we are on Christmas Eve, one day away from the Christmas celebrations. We already talked about the SEC and the Big East being on the nice and naughty list, respectively. We also talked about the freshman class and contrasted them with the fifth-year senior class, who by and large is not contributing at the level we expected them to. Now we got a pair of coaches and a pair of players to talk about here to close out the show. We start with what I already teased, Jerome Tang of Kansas State. He's on the naughty list. There's a couple of coaches that could have fit here that just aren't quite performing, coaching, leading their team at the level we expected from them. And Kansas State wasn't expected to be a top 5 team in the Big 12. Obviously, that was a pretty loaded place to be with Kansas, Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, and Arizona. But Kansas State was kind of in that conversation of, are they going to compete with Texas Tech and BYU and TCU and some of those other teams kind of in the middle of the Big 12? And the answer at this point is no. Not at all, really. This team's 6-5 on the year. They've already lost 3 games in a row. They started 4-1, with the only loss being a home loss to LSU. You don't want to lose at home, and LSU is certainly not the SEC team that you feel as comfortable losing to, but 4-1 with that being the only loss, yeah, that was okay. Then they lost to Liberty on a neutral site, and after beating Longwood and Arkansas Pine Bluff, they then lost 3 straight in a row. They lost to St. John's, they lost to Drake, and then they got whacked by Wichita State, 21-point loss to the Shockers. It's just been a rough stretch for Jerome Tang and the Wildcats. They also lost a player in a second year in a row. A player has been dismissed from the team early in the season. Last year was Naquan Tomlin, who ended up finishing the year with Memphis. This year was Achor, who's the transfer from Oakland, who came in, from Samford. He transferred from Samford, was very, very successful for them, was kind of expected to be a big part of this team, didn't play early in the year and just never really got very much playing time. Now he's been dismissed from the program. This the wheels have really come off the Jerome Tang era at Kansas State. They had that Elite Eight run with Marquise Noel, Keontae Johnson. Since then, things have not gone very well. This year's team, Doug McDaniel, has played well at times, but has also missed some action. We talked about Coleman Hawkins already. The front court rotation is very odd. It's just a kind of a mess of a roster, and it doesn't look like Tang is particularly close to figuring out how to get all these pieces to fit together. So the optimism around this team right now is pretty low. And Kansas State committed a whole bunch of money to him and would have to eat a big contract if they were to fire him. So they're kind of stuck with Jerome Tang right now. And I'm sure that's not exactly what these K-State fans want to hear so close to the holiday. Flip side of that is on the nice list. You have Jared Calhoun, the new coach, the first-year coach at Utah State, the Aggies. And if you want to boost your coaching resume, if you want to get yourself moving in the right direction, take the head coaching job at Utah State, man. It has been just a tremendous run of coaches. Utah State currently 11-1 on the year. They just beat St. Mary's in a true road game. It is not easy to go to Moraga and come away with a victory. That was the case for Utah State. They pretty much led the entire game here against the Gales. The only loss for Utah State was to UC San Diego. That was a home loss against a not great team. If they managed to win that one, they'd be 12-0. They'd almost certainly be in the top 25. They have wins over Iowa. They have a win over North Texas, St. Bonaventure. They have a win over South Florida, Wyoming, Montana. Not a ton of great wins, but Iowa, St. Mary's, North Texas are all top 80 teams at KenPom, and St. Bonaventure. They're all top 80 teams at KenPom. This has been a really, really nice season. And this is a coach who replaced Danny Sprinkle, who went to Washington, who was only at Utah State for 1 year because he replaced Ryan Odom, who went to VCU after being at Utah State for a couple of years. And he replaced Craig Smith, who went to Utah after being at Utah State for 3 years. That is a really, really good stretch of coaches. The fact that Utah State has continually lost their head coaches to other places and has found similarly effective coaches to come in and immediately keep this program playing at a high level is really remarkable, and something that doesn't happen at the mid-major level. The fear is always that, a program that, especially a program that doesn't have just endless amounts of money. Utah State is not a low resource school, but they're not a super high resource school either. And for them to continually find success with their new coaches is truly something that doesn't happen very often. So big shout out to Calhoun and the Aggies for the way that they've been playing. Closing it out with a couple of players here. TJ Power is on the naughty list, and I thought about expanding this to just talk about high-profile members of the 2023 freshman class who are sophomores who transferred, but it was a little too complicated. But there are quite a few players who kind of fit into this category of like, hey, was a super highly regarded player in last year's freshman class, didn't play super well as a freshman, transferred, and I'm now struggling once again at a new school in my sophomore season. Power exemplifies it more than anybody else, so he's the one who draws the criticism here on the naughty list. 12 games at Virginia, 5 of them starts. He's only playing about 13 minutes a game, and the numbers just aren't there, folks. 2 points per game, 1.5 boards, less than an assist. He's shooting 23.1% from three, and that is higher than his 2-point percentage, which is an abysmal 22.2%. This is a top 20 recruit in the 2023 class. This guy who committed to Duke, who didn't play much at Duke, but that was fine. Duke was loaded last year. Kyle Filipowski was in front of him. He averaged 2.1 points per game in 7 minutes. Now he's averaging 2 points per game in twice as much playing time, and he's shooting 23% from the field. Some of this belongs on Tony Bennett. Some of this belongs on Virginia. Bennett, of course, leaving Virginia, and Ron Sanchez replacing him. And I think that change is likely impacting a lot of players for Virginia. But Elijah Saunders playing great. And meanwhile, TJ Power just hasn't been able to do much of anything. It's looking like it's hard to imagine that he plays well enough at any point in his college career to not have a pretty massive bust label on him. Hopefully that's not the case, but the early return's not looking good for Power this season in Charlottesville. I'll mention Sean Stewart, who's playing better than that, 5.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game at Ohio State, but hasn't really looked all that good as another big man from Duke who hit the transfer portal this offseason as well. And then last but not least, on the nice list, we already had the freshman class as kind of one of the nice lists. So this guy gets his own separate spot to be discussed, and that's Jeremiah Fears. What an incredible season that we are seeing from Jeremiah Fears, freshman guard for the Oklahoma Sooners. Porter Moser's big-time addition this year in the portal, or out of the freshman class. He reclassified, one of the youngest players in college basketball, playing in the SEC, playing a strong schedule for Oklahoma, and Fears through 12 games, he's averaging 18 points per game. He's averaging 4.7 assists, 3.4 boards, and 2.2 steals. He is shooting just under 58% on two-pointers, and that's on nearly 8 attempts per game. His three-point shooting is fine, 32.6%. You expect that to come up. If it does, wow, what an incredible player we're talking about here. He's also shooting about 4 three-pointers per game. He's had some monster performances, 30 points on 8 of 12 shooting against Michigan in the Jumpman Invitational. That, for anybody who wasn't aware of him, that really put him on the radar. He had 26 points, 5 boards, 5 assists against Arizona in the battle for Atlantis. On the season, he's already taken 75 free throw attempts, averaging over 6 free throws per game. He's knocking him down about 87%. We're talking about, again, one of the youngest players in college basketball, who is highly efficient as a scorer, who has a decent three-point shot that likely will improve, especially with NBA floor spacing. If you're looking at him from a draft perspective, you have a player who is already elite at getting to the free throw line and converting. That is one of the, if not the most valuable skill for a smaller guard who's looking to make it to the NBA. Fears already has that at his age. He is rocketing up mock drafts, rocketing up big boards. One of the best players kind of out of, I don't want to say out of nowhere. He was a highly regarded freshman, but nobody expected him to look like this right away. And it has been one of the best stories in college basketball. So no nice list would be complete without Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma, who's really elevating Porter Moser's program as they look to be competitive in their first season in the very, very loaded SEC. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, especially here in the midst of the holiday season. We'll be back with another episode for you on Christmas Day. We got some fun stuff to talk about, some real basketball to talk about, as well as some more holiday-themed stuff to get you through. Then we'll, of course, get you ready for a big-time weekend of college hoops as we got some of the last marquee non-conference matchups of the season before we get into conference play and 2025. Thanks again, folks, and until next time, as always, peace out.